Hello peeps, welcome back to Big Deck Player with me, Matt Sparks. On today's show we are taking a look at a Shaman deck. This is a Dragon Shaman deck. This is brought to you by the Hearthstone user Orange Bull. Here is the deck, let's take a look at it. It's quite interesting, it's a little bit different from some of the other Shaman decks. I've been looking for a dragon deck, because I keep seeing these decks that claim to be dragon decks, but they don't often have a lot of dragons in them. Now, I know it's not always practical to have a lot of dragons in a dragon deck, because you want it to actually do well. And this one is pretty good. This one's pretty good. So, start off, we've got 2 Earth Shocks. This is your only silence. And it's a pretty good one, because it's only 1 mana, and it does some damage as well, which can be buffed up with totems and such. So Earthshock's pretty good. It can be particularly good early game against stuff like Argent Squire, because it just gets rid of it completely. Leper Gnome, stuff like that. So when you're picking your cards at the beginning of the game, if you don't have this in your hand, you might want a mulligan to try and get one. And speaking of mulligan, Zombie Chow, also at 1 mana. This is another one you want to try and get early game if you can. It's quite nice if you're coming up against a mage that uses secrets to pop one of these, in case they have the mirror entity, because then they get one and then you can kill it and get some health back, which is a pretty nice kind of way of being able to use their secret to your advantage. We only have 1 Flame Tongue totem at 2 mana, so use it wisely. Preferably you probably want to use this towards the end of the game when you're trying to finish off your opponent, or use it to make better trades. Also at 2 mana, we have a Recombobulator. Now, this is kind of why I wanted to take a look at this deck, because you don't see the Recombobulator in decks very often, especially Shaman decks. Now, Recombobulator can be used on quite a few different cards in this deck, which I'll go through when we get to them. But I quite like the idea of the Recombobulator, and because we don't see it very often, I think it might take your opponent by surprise, because I can't even remember the last time I saw a Recombobulator in a ranked match. At 3 mana, we have 2 Feral Spirits. It's been a while since I played a Shaman deck that actually has Feral Spirits in it, so I'm quite glad to see them back in action. Overload of 2, which kind of sucks, but 2 2/3 taunts are not too bad. Not too bad at all. But just bear in mind, you do have that overload, so if you're going to play these turn 3, turn 4 you're only going to have 2 mana. So you might not necessarily want to play these early on unless you're up against some kind of aggro deck. Also at 3 mana we have 2 Hex. Again, use these very wisely. If you've got an Earthshock in your hand, you might find that using the Earthshock is a better value play than using a Hex on the target. Hex and Earthshocks, use them as carefully as possible. Try and work out what your opponent is going to be playing later on in the game, and then you can decide whether you want to use the Earthshock or the Hex. We have 2 Lightning Storms. So this is your kind of comeback card, I guess. If you're finding yourself a little bit overwhelmed, if you're coming up against aggros, quite a lot of aggro decks, you might want to mulligan for a Lightning Storm at the start, just so you've got it in your hand ready to go. I'm always tempted to kind of bait out my opponent's cards a bit more and make it look like I don't have anything in my hand that I can play, in the hope that they put out more and more cards so that Lightning Storm gets much more value. Also at 3 mana we have a Big Game Hunter. So should you not have this in your hand, then use the Hex. You can use your Hex on a Dr. Boon, but otherwise you could use a Big Game Hunter. Now this is one of the targets I was talking about for the Recombobulator. At 3 mana it's a 4/2, which maybe isn't the best stat line you could get for a 3 mana card. There might be some other 3 mana cards that are slightly better than this, for stats anyway. So once you've used your Big Game Hunter, because he dies fairly easily, I mean let's face it, he's only got 2 health. He dies fairly easily, so once you've brought him out onto the field, taking care of whatever it is that he's killing, you could then use your Recombobulator on the Big Game Hunter in the hope that maybe you'll get something that might survive a bit longer than 1 hit. Lastly, at 3 mana, we also have 2 Blackwing Technicians. I quite like these cards, but it does rely on you having a dragon in your hand, and sometimes you don't get a dragon in your hand for quite a while, and I'm always reluctant to play it as a 2/4 for 3 when I know that it could be a 3/5 for 3. And obviously a 3/5 for 3 is going to be much better value for trading and much more difficult to get rid of for your opponent. At 4 mana we have 2 Defender of Argus. I haven't played a deck with Defender of Argus in for quite some time, but I think Defender of Argus is one of the best cards from the original vanilla days of Hearthstone. Increasing adjacent minions' health and attack by 1 and giving them taunt is very, very cool indeed. Allows for better trades, makes it more difficult for your opponent to get to your face because you've now got 2 taunts. Sometimes it's quite nice, I find, to combo the Defender of Argus with a Feral Spirit, because then you'll have 2 3/4 taunts, which can be a bit more sticky and trade better. At 4 mana also we have 1 Hungry Dragon. Now this gives your opponent a random 1-cost minion, so it's probably best to play the Hungry Dragon when you've got something on the board that can get rid of that 1-cost minion, or you've got means to get rid of it in your hand. Playing a Hungry Dragon when your opponent already has lots of things on the board and then following it up with a Lightning Storm is very, very good. But a 5/6 for 4 is awesome. At 5 mana we have an Antique Healbot, restoring 8 health to the hero on its battle cry. Now this is also another prime target for the Recombobulator, because 3/3 for 5 is pretty awful, but there's lots of other much better cards that you can get at 5 mana. Once you've played your Antique Healbot, then play your Recombobulator, and maybe you'll get something awesome. Also at 5 mana we have 2 Azure Drakes for a little bit of card draw, and they're dragons, so that's very cool. Also at 5 mana we have 2 Blackwing Corruptors, another card necessary for you to have dragons in your hand. So this is kind of a bit like the Fire Elementals, so you get the extra 3 damage on the battle cry. Very cool indeed. A 5/4 for 5 isn't fantastic, but the fact that you get that extra 3 damage means you can probably trade a lot better or kill stuff off completely with it, which is very, very nice indeed. Although it's only got 4 health, which is prone to some weapons, it does still mean that if they use a weapon to get rid of it, they're still going to take 5 damage to the face, so that's always very nice indeed. Talking about your opponent having weapons, we have a Harrison Jones for a little bit more card draw. Obviously, when you come up against stuff like priests and warlocks and mages, you're probably not going to have a huge amount of use for Harrison Jones, but it's always worth keeping it ready just in case. There's always a chance that mages might get something with Unstable Portal that gives them a weapon. Now, if you can use Harrison Jones on Jaraxxus, it's very satisfying. It's one of the most satisfying things I think you can do in this game. At 5 mana also, we have 1 Loatheb. Trying to use Loatheb to protect your minions against AoEs and such is probably the best use for this card. Obviously, depending on who you're playing against, whether it be a paladin or a mage, playing a Loatheb on the turn that they're going to be playing something like maybe a Consecrate, a Flame Strike, or maybe you even want to play it against a priest on turn 10 so that they can't use a mind control. Be smart with it. At 6 mana we have 2 Fire Elementals. As we mentioned earlier with the Blackwing Corruptors, these also get the deal 5 damage. You don't have to have the dragon in your hand though when you play these, so that's very cool indeed. And again, because they're quite a big minion and they do the 3 damage, they trade effectively and they do an awful lot of damage to the face. So these cards are pretty much a staple for most Shaman decks. Very cool card indeed. At 7 mana we have a Dr. Boom, because it's Dr. Boom and it's Dr. Boom. And then at 9 mana we have 2 legendaries and 2 dragons. First off we have Nefarian, which is an 8/8 dragon, which adds 2 random spells to your hand from your opponent's class. So that's very, very cool indeed. Obviously if you get this fairly early on, you don't have to worry about other dragons in your hand. You can play the other dragons and still be able to get the benefit of the Blackwing Corruptor and the Blackwing Technician. And finally, last but not least, we have an Ysera. Ysera can turn the game around, as you'll probably see in one of the videos in the background. You can win the game just by having Ysera on the board and getting the cards that she gives you and making effective trades. Ysera can win you the game. So that's the deck. It does have dragons in it, It doesn't have a huge amount of dragons in it, but it has enough to make it work. It's not a fast deck, but it is pretty solid. And you want to kind of play control to begin with as much as you can before you bring out your big hitters towards the end. And use the recombobulator, the one recombobulator you get, use it on something that you think would be worthwhile. Obviously you could use it on something like Dr. Boom. If Dr. Boom's taking a whole bunch of damage, he's sitting on 1 health, then maybe use it on Dr. Boom and see what you get. There might be something useful. Probably best not to use it on Nefarian or Ysera. Yeah, there's always a chance that you might get Major Domo Executus, and that could cost you the game. So don't use the Recombobulator on Nefarian or Ysera. So that's the Dragon Shaman deck. It's quite an expensive deck, mainly because of the 5 legendaries in it, but I think it could be quite fun. I've been having fun with it so far, but I haven't played an awful lot of it. So I'm going to play a whole bunch more of this, and because I like playing Shaman, and we don't see Shaman very often. If you play this deck, let me know how you get on. If you make any videos with this deck, feel free to link them to me, and I will be sure to check them out. If you've got any suggestions for any future decks that you'd like to see featured in Big Deck Playa, then be sure to link them to me, and I'll be on my way to check them out. Otherwise, I will see you next week, where we will have some more Big Deck Playa. Thanks very much for watching, peeps. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.